In Disney's never-ending effort to steal absolutely everything they can from the old expanded universe, we now have From a Certain Point of View, a collection of short stories focused around one particular film, much like Legends had Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, Tales of the Bounty Hunters, and Tales from Jabba's Palace, one for each film in the original trilogy. From a Certain Point of View was released to celebrate the 40th anniversary of A New Hope alongside the 40th anniversary special edition novelisation of the same film. At least From a Certain Point of View comes with a dust jacket, unlike the anniversary edition of A New Hope. Perhaps Disney is learning after all. I was expecting the book to not be up to par, but to be honest, I actually quite enjoyed it. I won't go through all 40 stories contained in the book, but I will highlight the ones I thought were particularly good or particularly bad. The first story in the book, Ramus, sees Captain Ramus Antilles attempting to escort Princess Leia and the Death Star plans from the Battle of Scarif at the end of Rogue One to Alderaan, only to fail and come out of hyperspace at Tatooine. I always wondered why they were at Tatooine in A New Hope if they wanted to get to Alderaan, and Ramus addresses that problem nicely, and also addresses how the Empire managed to track the Tantive 4. On the other hand, I was hoping to see Lieutenant Ress Batten make an appearance since she appeared in Leia Princess of Alderaan as one of Leia's royal guards. Leia Princess of Alderaan was only released a month before From a Certain Point of View was released, and it would have been a nice reference for people who read that book to go, "Oh yeah, I know her, she was in that other book I just read." But sadly, Disney and Hidalgo don't care about lore, and unfortunately, she was absent. I also thought it was a shame that given the fact that when Captain Antilles was murdered by Vader, the actor threw his arms up to protect himself when he was thrown at the wall even though his character was dead, is now world famous. I thought this was a golden opportunity not to retcon it, but to explain how or why that happened. Unfortunately, that didn't happen in Ramus. It's a shame because there were two golden opportunities in Ramus and they were just wasted. The Sith of Data work by Ken Liu was just funny. It's one of the shorter ones, but it explains why the gunnery officer let the escape pod go at the beginning of A New Hope, and it shows how he tried to get out of it. Unfortunately for him, the way out is forms, seemingly millions of them, and I did laugh when form piled upon form and he had no idea what he was doing. I also liked the fact that one of the forms was called Catch-22, and overall the Sith of Data work had a similar sense of humour to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Some of the humour was quite in-universe and some of it was quite meta, and I really enjoyed it even though it's one of the shorter stories. I also enjoyed Stories in the Sand by Griffin McElroy. I can't really explain why. It was just a fun little story about a Jawa watching holograms and dreaming of working on a ship, and I could imagine the little Jawa sitting there dead still in his little hole just watching holograms for hours. I was expecting the 3PO to turn up when he says the name Storyteller, but I'm actually quite pleased it wasn't because I liked the way the story went. I also liked the ending, which reminded me of the way Skippy the Jedi Droid ended in Tales Volume 1. Speaking of Skippy the Jedi Droid, the red one officially replaces him with a bog standard R5 unit. It was a good story and I liked the ending, but I think I prefer Skippy's story to this one. This one makes more sense, but I don't care. Skippy forever, man. I really enjoyed Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. It sees Ben talking to the Force Ghost of Qui-Gon Jinn and gives a really interesting look into the netherworld of the Force as it's now known. It's not the only story that does this, and there are two others that kind of play well together with this one further on in the book. It's half a look into what it feels like to be a Force Ghost and half conversation between Ben and Qui-Gon about events to come, and it was a fun read. You know what's coming in the movie, Qui-Gon knows too, but he can't reveal too much to Ben. There's not much to the story, but it was still very entertaining. Given that Claudia Gray has a book coming out in April also called Master and Apprentice, I'm curious to see if this scene will play a role in that book. No doubt if it does, people will be amazed that she knew to put that in beforehand, just like they were with Bloodline and Leia Princess of Alderaan. But when you think about it, it's not really a difficult trick to do, seeing as she literally gets to control the events that occur in the books that she writes. I'm not sure why people were so amazed by the memory box thing in Bloodline. Was it a good bit of writing that referenced another book? Yes. Was it amazing and feels like she had clairvoyant abilities like so many people make out? No. It's like getting all the answers right to a test you wrote. But I'm getting off topic, and yes, I did like Master and Apprentice. And then there's Chuck Wendig's story. His is We Don't Serve Their Kind Here, the only story that seemed to be advertised before the book was released. It tells the story of Wu He, the bartender in the Mos Eisley Cantina. I didn't fall asleep when I was reading it, and I can't really tell if his writing was better than it was in the Aftermath trilogy, or if it's just because it was only 10 pages I didn't get the opportunity to. Overall, I did enjoy the story, but it doesn't matter because in the space of 10 pages, he's managed to fuck it all up again. He's included a gay couple, which, as usual, I have no problem with, except for the fact that it's Wendig. He's included it because it's what he's known for, and I resent that. Other authors included gay people in from a certain point of view, and I didn't give a shit, which is why you won't hear me talk about them. But because Wendig clearly did it because he wants to be known as the gay Star Wars author, it pissed me off. Just like I said in one of my Aftermath reviews, he wants to plant his own legacy whether he writes a good story or not. He's also included Jakku, which apparently has a decent bit of export going by selling particularly strong alcohol to other planets. Here's me thinking Jakku is a desolate place with nothing to export and where people can barely survive because there's literally nothing there. But thank God for Chuck fucking Wendig for telling me everything I know about Jakku is wrong. Everything from the movies, the comics, and even his own fucking books. Then there's the fact that halfway through the book, someone mentions Wu He just dragged a Rodian out of the bar. No explanation is given for why, even though it's in the middle of the scene. It just comes out of nowhere. You may be thinking it's Greedo, but the problem is, 2 pages later, Han shoots Greedo. Either that's an awful coincidence, or once again, Chuck Wendig had his priorities wrong. Perhaps if he'd focused on his story, on the characters, the places, and on getting the timeline right, instead of forcing Jakku and gay people into a 10-page story, he would have got everything right. But Wendig doesn't care about that. He cares about imprinting his shitty legacy on the Star Wars franchise. Wendig wants to be known as the saviour of the LGBT community in Star Wars, and he's just not. He's a troll and an arsehole. As I said, other authors included gay people, and it was fine because you know they were written in as actual characters that had something to offer, and so were important to the story, and the authors weren't just doing it to be known for something. Fuck Chuck Wendig. He's a one-trick pony whose only trick wasn't very good in the first place. For ages I thought to myself, if there's ever another book by him, or that has a story by him, I won't buy it. And I had no idea why Disney insisted on keeping him hanging around. Then I realised why, and it's because they don't listen to fans. Fortunately, Wendig has been officially removed from Star Wars, so there's hope for the future of the franchise yet. For anyone who's unaware, he was in the middle of writing a 5-issue comic and planning on writing a book when he was told by both Marvel and Lucasfilm that he was fired for his inappropriate behaviour. Damn fucking straight. You can't represent companies like Marvel and Disney, then act like a child, effing and blinding everywhere just because people don't agree with you. Children read his work, and if I had, I don't know, an 8-year-old that asked me if they could Google the author of one of their favourite Star Wars books, I would say yes, because what harm could possibly come from that? But then this kid would look at Chuck Wendig's Twitter page where he talks about cucks, fuck Trump and all that shit, and it would be an 8-year-old reading those comments, and it's not appropriate at all. Not only that, but when people dare to say his books are bad, he always insists it's because they're homophobic. And it's not. It's because he's a piss poor author who focuses on pushing his political agenda at the expense of telling a good story. Any author worth his or her salt would be able to do both at once, and that's why Wendig is a bad author. It's not because he has gay people in his books, it's not because he has transsexuals in his books, it's because he has them in his books at the expense of having a good story, instead of having both. As well as that, when someone dares to disagree with him about his books and leaves a negative review, he will actually search for that person on social media and try and prove that they're homophobic, rather than just accepting that someone doesn't like his book. It's like he's trying to change someone's opinion of his book by proving them wrong, and that's not how opinions work, especially for media. With media, you either watch, read, or listen, and at the end, however you feel is how you feel. That's it. For someone who disagrees with Trump's ignorance so much, he has a hell of a lot of it himself. I actually pointed this out to him very politely in a reply to his comments on Twitter, and the guy fucking blocked me. It says a lot about him as a person and shows how narrow-minded he truly is. According to Wendig, Marvel is done with him and so is Lucasfilm, but Disney is okay with him. That's bullshit because both companies are owned by Disney. Even if it was true and Disney is okay with him, it doesn't matter because the people who actually publish his work don't want him. So whether Disney is okay with him or not is irrelevant because he's not getting any Star Wars work published anymore. As Yoda said, at an end your rule is, and not short enough it was. What frustrates me about him is that after all of this, after the fans gave their opinions, after he trolled people, after he posted tweets with profanity that kids can see, he still won't accept any responsibility for his own actions and the consequences that come with them. He's still going on about how he's being sabotaged by homophobes and Russian bots. Yeah, now he's blaming bots. The guy is a loser of epic proportions whose personality is a lot closer to Trump's than he realises. But I digress. The Cluehorn Cantina caper was just bad. I mean, it was so bad that I actually stopped reading it. I read every other story in the book, but where most stories were between 5 and 15 pages long, this one was 30 pages long. That's not really an issue in and of itself, but when the whole thing is written in nonsense and the plot feels like it was decided by spinning a wheel rather than being crafted, it's just crap. It's a case of quantity over quality and should have been omitted from the book. Will Wheaton had a story called Lena, and it's about the guy who scans the ships in the tower on Yavin 4. He sent his daughter away from the rebellion in the hope that she would live in safety. At the end of the story, it's revealed that the planet she was sent to was Alderaan, but it's not made clear if she arrived or not. If she did, it's sad. Change of Heart by Elizabeth Wein, or Wine, I'm not sure how you say her last name. It was good overall, and it was enjoyable to read, but I thought the ending was just plain stupid. The idea that a stormtrooper joined the rebellion because what? He stood there and didn't shout out, "The princess is lying, the princess is lying," is just absolutely fucking stupid. It spoiled an otherwise good story. Far Too Remote by Jeffrey Brown is a waste of space and shouldn't be in the book. It's a one-page comic box that shows the Imperials inspecting Dantooine with a box that says Rebel Base. That's REBULBAZE. It's fucking stupid. It's a waste of time and space and actually affects the book in a negative way by bringing the number of short stories down from 40 to 39, which isn't what's advertised. I honestly think there should have been fewer stories anyway, but damn it, if they advertise 40 short stories, it should be 40 short stories, not 39 short stories and one page of filler because they ran out of ideas. The Trigger by Kieran Gillen has one of my favourite new characters in it, Dr. Aphra. In typical Aphra fashion, she's exploring the abandoned rebel base on Dantooine when she gets captured by Imperials and has to talk her way out of it. It's a good little story that stays true to Aphra's character and brings a little of the fun factor that always comes with her. Speaking of Aphra, for ages, ever since I read the Vader Omnibus actually, I've been trying to think of who it is Aphra reminds me of. Everyone always says Indiana Jones, but for me that's not it. I've been racking my brain trying to figure out who it is, and then I finally realised who it was. It's not Indy, but it is an archaeologist. It's River Song from Doctor Who. See, she's an archaeologist too. Aphra doesn't remind me of Indy because Indy has good morals. He always fights the Nazis and tries to do the right thing, whereas Aphra has what can be described at best as questionable morals and at worst just plain old selfish. There's no real similarity there between her and Indy apart from their job description. I know she's a good guy, but she has this playful fun factor about her, the same way Aphra does. She also had, particularly earlier on in her most famous regeneration, questionable morals. That's who Aphra should be compared to. River Song, not Indy. Don't get me wrong, I love Indy, but he's a bad comparison for Aphra when River Song is sitting right there. The Baptist by... I have no idea how you say that. Nnedi Okorafor? Nnedi Okorafor? It's a story about the Dianaga in the trash compactor, and it was crap. Crap. It gave a good look at the life of the Dianaga, but it failed to reveal one crucial aspect of the story, which is why it was sent to the Death Star in the first place. The whole story follows its deliberate transfer from its home planet to the trash compactor by the Imperials, and not once is it mentioned why they need it. Also, the Dianaga seems to be force sensitive. I don't know, it's another story that feels like it was written by spinning a wheel, and it's crap because of it. Time of Death by Cavan Scott is one of the stories that kind of teams up with Master and Apprentice in that it shows Ben's transition from life to death and the netherworld of the Force. It was a good story and sees him having visions where he's flitting back and forth in time, with one of the memories being of how he defended Luke as a child and is directly responsible for the fact that Uncle Owen wouldn't let him anywhere near Luke, and the other being a vision of the future where he sees Luke miserable and alone on Ahch-To and Han falling off the bridge when he dies. I was expecting to see Qui-Gon there on the other side, helping him to transition, but he wasn't, and I think that's a shame. Perhaps it's a solitary experience until the deed is done, so I don't have an issue with it. I just think it would have been an extra bit that I would have included had it been me, but it's a great little story. There is another by Gary D. Schmidt, immediately follows Time of Death and explores Yoda's life on Dagobah. We see him moving from one place to another, planting seeds as the seasons dictate, and lamenting how he never got to train Leia in the ways of the Jedi, when he feels Ben and Vader fighting across the galaxy, then feels Ben's presence in the Force grow, then disappear completely at his moment of death. Ben appears to Yoda as a Force ghost straight away, and they discuss the future of the Skywalkers. I really enjoyed the story, but some of the conversation seemed to be slightly pointless because it's almost a direct copy of the conversation Luke, Ben and Yoda all have when Yoda reveals his true identity to Luke in The Empire Strikes Back. In spite of that, it's still a cool little backstory that helps bolster the original trilogy. Sparks by Paul S. Kemp didn't do much for me, but in terms of lore it's kind of funny because it officially makes Fake Wedge not Wedge anymore. For people who don't know, Fake Wedge is the guy who said it's impossible to hit a target that small during the briefing before the Battle of Yavin. Unfortunately, the actor hadn't learned his lines properly and admitted as much to George Lucas, who then replaced him. But the character who said those lines was still supposed to be Wedge, and now the character has officially been renamed thanks to Sparks. The Angle by Charles Soule actually follows Lando and Lobot, which surprised me. I'm glad he was included though, because he hasn't had much love from Disney. It's not a complicated story, and it's actually quite funny when he sees the Millennium Falcon helping to blow up the Death Star on the HoloNet news. Credit to Charles Soule though, this story definitely comes before the Lando comic, which he wrote more than a year before. You can tell because he references Lobot's cybernetic implants and how they function, and I liked that because I can imagine them leaving the bar at the end of The Angle, then going off to the adventure they have in the Lando comic. It just helps make the universe all feel connected, so thumbs up to Charles Soule there. By Whatever Son is the penultimate story, and it's written by E.K. Johnston and Ashley Eckstein, both of Ahsoka fame, and focuses on Miara, who was the sister of Kaden in the Ahsoka novel. She was the one who betrayed Kaden and Ahsoka and went off to attack the Imperial compound with her homemade bombs. Johnston and Eckstein did a good job showing what happened to her after the events of the Ahsoka novel, even to Kaden to a certain extent, and it was a nice little callback to a character from a previous book. I'd love to see more of characters coming back from previous novels and interacting with new characters or even other characters from other novels. I quite often say that one of the problems with the new books is that they all feel like isolated little stories, and this is what I mean. Maybe in a future book we can have Miara join Twilight Company, or maybe since Caden is in medicine now, maybe she could be a doctor post Return of the Jedi. It's little connections like that, and seeing characters grow, develop and continue to exist and have an impact in other stories that really help decide whether a universe feels like it's made of isolated stories or if it's one story in a web of connectivity. The final story is Wills by Tom Angleberger, and I absolutely loved it. Honestly, if they hadn't ended the book with this, it wouldn't have been the same. It's a tongue-in-cheek jab at the way George Lucas decided to tell the Star Wars story back to front, and features two Wills debating the order of the story and how the opening crawl should go. It's really funny. You know how it ends up, but it's just really enjoyable to read. So I went on about more stories than I meant to, but honestly, every one I've mentioned is worth talking about because it's either so good, so bad, or so important to the Star Wars universe lore-wise. It was interesting to see almost every scene rewritten from another character's point of view, or written from another character's point of view that leads up to a scene that was in A New Hope, or after a scene. From a certain point of view reminded me of Death Star because it fills in a lot of gaps around the main plot of the movie that you may not have thought about, but there's no reason why these gaps couldn't or shouldn't be filled, and that's exactly what they've done here, and they've done it in a very enjoyable way. I liked the way everything connected to everything else, and hell, just like Thrawn Alliances, I didn't even have a problem with the prequels mixing with the original trilogy. I really do think that while rebooting the EU was a shame, it has given them the opportunity to create stories and link eras together in a way that just wasn't really possible while George Lucas was still making the prequels. It's a silver lining, not a justification, but I do think it's a positive thing that came out of it. From a certain point of view is a mixed bag, but like all anthologies, it's to be expected that some of the stories just won't be as good as others. Some of it is a matter of preference and taste, and sometimes it's down to the writer's ability or inability to write an interesting story in a captivating way. I do think 40 stories was too much though, to be honest. They chose 40 because when the book was released it was the 40th anniversary of the release of A New Hope at cinemas, and once again it's quantity over quality. I think if the book only had 20 or 25 stories it would have been a lot better, but because they wanted to use 40 you end up with at least a third of the book being mediocre at best and downright unreadable at worst. The book is about 450 pages long, and it didn't need to be considering how many stories are actually good compared to how many are bad. Stories like the Cluehorn Cantina Caper and The Baptist could have easily been cut. Had they have gone with 25 stories, the book would have been about 350 pages, and every page would have been golden. Instead they insisted on going with 40 stories regardless of the quality of the stories, and that's a shame because it brings the book down. One final note, and I do feel this is worth mentioning, is that all the authors in the book wrote their stories and contributed their time for free. Their proceeds went to First Book, a charity that brings books and education to children in need in over 30 countries, and I think that's a nice thing. So overall, I think from a certain point of view it's worth buying. The biggest issue for me was the fact that some of the scenes outstay their welcome. When you have about 5 stories in the cantina and about 5 based on the Battle of Yavin, it makes those stories less interesting, and what you end up with is a book where about a third of it is really great, a third is good, and the other third is just piss poor. And while that doesn't sound great, when the stories are good, they are really good, I have to admit, and they really give insight into the characters' minds and personalities, as well as showing behind the scenes, and they all fit in perfectly with the film, while also managing to expand what's already there. Some of it's serious, some of it's humorous, but when I finished reading and put the book down, the fact is I thought to myself, That was good.